Pints with Jack, Season 4, Episode 67.
And Pints with Chesterton, Episode 17.
Whatever. After Hours with Alan C. Duncan. Welcome, everyone. Pints with Jack is your weekly C.S. Lewis podcast, where normally Matt, Andrew and I break down and discuss the works of C.S. Lewis. And this season we were eavesdropping on Screwtape. However, we've now finished all of Screwtape's letters, and today is a Thursday, and it's therefore an After Hours episode. And today is a special crossover episode with another podcast which you might have heard of, Pints with Chesterton. And I am joined by my favourite co-host, seriously, she is my favourite of the two co-hosts, Mrs. Marie Bates.
Hello, thank you for having me. So today's episode came about because a few months ago, we received an email from somebody we didn't know. Alan sent us a message letting us know about an audiobook he had just recorded about C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton. So
we wanted to invite him onto a special crossover episode and talk about it. So, with all that, Alan C. Duncan, welcome to Pints with Jack.
And Pints with Chesterton.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm such a big fan of both of your work, and so it's so cool to see this crossover happen. I'm very excited and honored to be a part of this.
Well, before we get started, we just want to say thank you for reaching out to us, giving us an opportunity to not only listen to your audiobook, but also to talk about it.
Well, I appreciate you guys responding back to me because you all know how it is. Sometimes you think, oh, I think these people might enjoy something, and you send an email and it might just disappear into the ether, never
Yes.
to be heard from again. So I really appreciate you both taking the time to look into it and to find out what it was all about.
Yeah. It seemed too perfect. I mean, it was just our two favorite things, and we got excited when we saw your email.
I love it.
Well, we'll talk about your audiobook in a moment, but first we have to do the standard Pints with Jack segments. The quote of the week is from Lewis's spiritual autobiography, Surprised by Joy, where he talks about the influence of Chesterton upon him. It was here that I first read a volume of Chesterton's essays. I never heard of him and had no idea of what he stood for, nor can I quite understand why he made such an immediate conquest of me. In reading Chesterton, as in reading MacDonald, I did not know what I was letting myself in for. A young man who wishes to remain a sound atheist cannot be too careful of his reading. There are traps everywhere. And the drink of the week for me is Monkey Shoulder, which was bought for me by my delightful wife.
You're welcome. I am having water because I'm 5.5 months pregnant.
Congratulations, by the way. Congratulations.
Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think I've actually explicitly said it. Several of our guests have alluded to the fact that we are pregnant. But yeah, we are expecting our child in September, which gives me just enough time to finish convincing Marie that Reapercheap is just the sort of name that our son needs to help him stand out from the crowd.
No.
Give it time.
You could call him, what was the nickname be? Reap? Reapy?
Yeah, Reap.
Something like that?
Yeah.
Cheap or cheap? Reap or cheap, I guess.
I'm fully planning on using my emotional manipulation powers when this baby is born and naming them whatever I want to name them.
And I'm counting on the overpowering epidural. Alan, what are you drinking?
I am drinking a beer called Bank Boss. It is from a local brewery down the street from my house called Working Class Brewery. And I thought it would just be the perfect amount of local flavor that Chesterton would appreciate, particularly Lewis as well. But particularly Chesterton would appreciate the local nature of it. And it's a Belgian-style beer. And Chesterton was a big fan of the country of Belgium. So
Beautiful.
So yeah, that's what I'm drinking today. Yeah, Working Class Brewery, Bank Boss.
Well, at this point, we'd normally toast a Patreon supporter, but today I'd like to toast Pints with Chesterton, my wife, Grace, her co-host, and of course my unborn child. So if you'll please raise your glass. May you all have lives filled with wit and whimsy. Cheers.
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 Oh, hang on, that didn't sound good. That's
Okay. Here. Oh, that was good.
That was a good one.
I'm gonna clink the microphone.
We will have
quite
our...
have the
We're
same
leaving
ring.
that in. We're leaving that in.
having our editor take it out. What are you talking about?
Oh, Okay, so Alan, could you please kick things off by telling the listeners a little bit about your background?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I was born and raised a pastor's kid, kind of in Northeast Ohio in the Cleveland area. Went off to college to Malone University to study Bible and theology there. I actually got my Malone hat on now. That's about an hour south of Cleveland in a city called Canton. And the Pro Football Hall of Fame is actually there. Actually played 4 years of football there at Malone as kind of a backup, tailback, little scat back kind of a guy, very undersized. Got kicked around a lot, but it was fun. It was a good time. Graduated from college with a degree in Bible and theology, and then I went to work for an organization shortly after that I've been with ever since, called the American Policy Roundtable. They're a kind of a think tank, kind of a media and public policy organization that tries to remind Americans of kind of the first principles that the country was founded on. As Chesterton said, America is the only nation that was founded on a creed. That all people are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. So we try to remind people of those freedoms, and they were given to us not from our government, but from God. And so we have a podcast and a radio broadcast. Actually, it started as a radio broadcast first, and then now it's disseminated in many ways, called The Public Square.
Okay.
And so it talks about those kinds of themes. And so that's who actually published my book. And that's where I kind of developed some of the audio engineering abilities to produce an audio product for this book as well.
That's amazing. What a great organization to work for. That sounds so cool.
It has been pretty exciting and very educational over the years.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Lewis and Chesterton. When did you first come across Lewis?
Very early, as a child. My dad would read me Lewis, kind of bedtime stories type stuff. And so, I was venturing into the wardrobe early in my childhood. So I grew up with knowing a lot about Lewis. And then I got into reading him more for myself in college. And then just kind of throughout my adult life, I would read The Problem of Pain. I would read, His Grief Observed and Abolition of Man. Because like I said, I work for this organization. Lewis is talked about a lot during that organization, during meetings and radio broadcasts. And that's where I actually heard of Chesterton first as well.
Oh, wow.
The CEO of our organization, he'd record radio broadcasts and he'd quote Chesterton. Chesterton and Lewis are both very quotable.
Yes.
You can pull little chunks of them, and if they had been Twitter back when those guys were living, like, it would have been amazing stuff that they could have done.
Yeah.
That would have been one of the redeeming things about the platform.
Yeah.
But I kept hearing my boss quote him, and I thought I've got to find out about this guy. So I was into my adult years before I found Chesterton.
Okay.
And I tell people that when I read him, it was like water soaking into dry earth. That's the way I felt when I read Chesterton for the first time.
And we're so blessed that he was as prolific of a writer as he was, because there's just we've talked about it on our podcast before, how Grace and I don't even expect to be able to read everything he wrote in our lifetime.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So, okay, the audiobook. How did you research it and record an audiobook about Chesterton and Lewis? What made you decide to want to marry those two together or see how they influenced each other?
Well, I was saying, I had fallen in love with Chesterton. I'd always known of and loved Lewis my whole life, but then I found out about Chesterton. And so I started just going down the rabbit hole. As you know, it's very easy to do. Like you said, there's just almost feels like an endless supply of Chesterton. So, I read the Blatchford controversies first, and then I kind of was like, oh, that was interesting. Put it aside. Then I came back, I read Heretics, and that's when I felt, oh, I love this person. Like, I was like 7 pages in. I'm like, oh, okay, I love this guy. Yes. Yeah, it was, yeah. And then, I went on, I read Orthodox. So I was just reading all this stuff. So I started to listen to podcasts about Chesterton as well. And so Uncommon Sense with Nancy Brown was a podcast at the time. She's not doing that anymore. They still have Uncommon Sense going, but Nancy Brown's not working on that particular podcast. Adrian Alquist is doing that. Shout out, Adrian. And so Dale Alquist, the president of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton, was on the podcast, and they were doing kind of a live debate. And it was a Chesterton versus Lewis debate. They were just having fun with it. Yeah, which that would be fun for you guys to do a little back and forth one of these days.
It's a good idea.
Maybe we could get a little heated today. I don't know.
You're going down, Mrs. Bates.
Okay. Okay. We'll see. Do you want dinner tonight or?
She is carrying your child, so I don't know.
That's an unfair advantage. 2 versus 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So Dale Alquist on that podcast says, well, did Lewis and Chesterton ever meet? That's a question some people have that know of both of them. They want to know, well, did these guys ever meet? They didn't meet face to face, but Dale Alquist said, well, they did meet while Lewis was reading Chesterton's works. And he said that he wrote notes in the margins of these books. And I thought, I have to see those books. I don't know where they are. Yeah. I'm like, that exists? Stuff Lewis wrote in the margins of Chesterton's books exists? I got to see it.
Yeah.
So I started searching online. I thought these are going to be in England. There's no possible way that they're in the States.
Right.
And indeed, some of his library is, I believe, at Roxton College. There is some stuff in England. I'd love to get there sometime. But the Wade Center and Wheaton College also has a nice chunk of Lewis's library, as well as other authors as well as Chesterton too. And so you can book a day, you can go sit down, and you can look at and check out books that Chesterton wrote, that Lewis owned, and Lewis wrote in the margins. And it was really, really cool. My dad went with me, and we just had a great day.
That is amazing.
Yeah, when I first took Marie to England, when she was my lowly girlfriend, not even wife and mother of my child, we went to Oxford and we got to see Chesterton's library. So his books with his those are hilarious. The guy liked to doodle.
He did.
Yeah. He didn't do so, in the books we saw at least, he didn't do so many notes as he did draw swords and little guys fighting. But it was really, it was really interesting because we admire them so much and we read their works as these great minds, but they were regular people who read other people's books and drew doodles in the margins. They weren't thinking, oh, I'm creating a portal for people to look back at me in 100 years. They were just living and reading and writing,
Yeah, it's amazing. It's funny you mentioned that. I did check out some of Chesterton's library because the Wade Center has some of his too. So I have seen some of that doodling that you're talking about. And it's funny, Lewis's handwriting and penmanship, though it changes a little bit over the years, maybe we can talk about that some later, but it's pretty concise. It's pretty neat. It's very ordered. You can tell what's going on in his mind. And then you look at Chesterton's stuff. There was one, I don't know if it was coffee or wine, but it was splashed and spilled and dried all over this book. I'm like, well, he was drinking something that day. Yeah. And then you're right. He's just drawing these old guys' faces in profile and just the weirdest stuff.
Yeah.
I just loved it. It was they're so similar in so many ways, but also so very different in so many ways. And I just love that.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I love imagining each of them writing in the different settings that they would have written in. And, all the stories you hear about Chesterton, it's like he was in a pub, he was in bed, he was sitting at his breakfast table or whatever. But with Lewis, it felt like he had a little bit more of a
clear structure.
Yeah, and he was sitting at his writing desk for a lot of his writing, and he had a more structured way of doing things, which is funny because that's David and I exactly.
I was gonna ask, do you find that? The show notes came over to me. I said, oh, okay, we're gonna be more Lewis today.
Yeah, this is not from me. I didn't make the notes, but it's really nice. They had a lot to. Lewis learned so much from Chesterton. I'm sure Chesterton, if he had been the one who'd come later, would have learned from Lewis as well. So.
Oh, that's interesting. That is interesting to think about. Yeah. Well, I've heard people say once you discover Chesterton, you don't need to read Lewis anymore.
Dale Alquist says that. We're going to fight.
I wasn't going to name names. But
God bless
but
you, Dale.
I don't,
We're okay with you.
yes. But I do disagree with that. I think that they both, like I said, they're similar, but they're very different. Chesterton is kind of more freewheeling and go with the flow, and that's so necessary, and that's going to impact people in a certain way. But Lewis is so very tight and structured and concise. Like it's just a different thing.
Yeah, and you can't. I mean, it would be such a less colorful, less interesting world if we started making those kinds of statements, even just about poetry. It's not like because we had Byron.
Yeah.
We don't want Whitman, or, like you don't want to say, well, this poet was, we had Shakespeare, so we don't need any of these poets who came later. No, they all add to the richness of language and the human experience. So
yeah.
And they also talk to each other, which is the great thing about your audiobook. We get to see the conversation, so to speak, that they had.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, I think Dale is probably kidding when he says it. I don't know. I don't want to speak for him, but I hope he's. Well,
he's a wise man, so I think he would realize that was foolish to say.
If he knows what's good for him.
If he knows.
Well, the Screwtape letters. The Screwtape letters is required reading for the Chesterton Academy. It's on their reading list. So I think because the Screwtape letters is something, as you guys have just been going through, Chesterton doesn't have something exactly like that. Like that's totally, I think Chesterton may have influenced it, but what Lewis did with that is not something that really anybody I think has ever done.
Yeah.
So you don't want to lose that.
Yeah.
Now, you sent us your audiobook. Firstly, how do people get the audiobook? I'll put links and everything in the show notes. And also, is it audio only, or is there a print version as well?
Oh, thanks for asking. The place that I'm directing everybody right now is the radio broadcast that I work for as producer and one of the panel members is the Public Square, as I talked about. We have a free phone app that people can download. The audiobook is there on that phone app for absolutely free if people want to do it. So we're directing people to the Public Square app, mobile app, and they can listen to the book there. That said, I know it's kind of difficult. A lot of times people that listen to audiobooks have a very specific way they like to do it, a specific site that they use. So it is other places as well. It should be most places where you can get an audiobook at this time.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And we're working on a print version, but there is a Kindle ebook as well.
Great.
So folks can do that.
So in the preface to your audiobook, you talked about how you did the research. So can you please tell our listeners, how did you discover the details of Chesterton's influence upon Lewis? You've hinted at it already.
Sure. Okay, so the Marion E. Wade Center at Wheaton College, for anybody that's listening to this podcast, you'd probably really like the library. You should probably just go. They're great folks there. So we emailed them, and it's interesting. You have to go through some protocols. You have to tell them exactly what books you want to look at. They have kind of a database on their website where you can go through and see, okay, this is C.S. Lewis's library, and these are all the books he owned. Like you could go look at his copies of like Chaucer and Shakespeare, and all these different things are there. But we had limited time, so we checked out just the Chesterton books that he owned that had annotations in the margins, because they've cataloged them for you. It says these books on these pages have some kind of notation. So we checked out 11 of those books ahead of time, and then got there and they had them all, because they're not just like on shelves necessarily. They're kind of back in the caverns of the library. So they bring them out to you one at a time, and they place them on this like pillow before you, and you can't have any ink, no pens, and
no drinks,
put you right up front.
No coffee,
no drink. Yeah, no, there was no pints. So we had no pints.
At least with Chesterton's books, how would they know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he did that, not me. That was him.
Yeah.
So then we just went through. We just kind of had yellow legal pads and went through and just hand copied every page and every note that was in the book. And so that
is so cool.
It was really fun. I mean, in like the nerdiest possible way. It was just very fun. So and it was cool to do with my dad. You know, he and I would be like whispering back and forth and stuff. And we're kind of looking at the security cameras, and there were things we wanted to take pictures of. There were no pictures allowed because all these notes are owned by the different like Lewis Company and stuff. But
So
it was just a great time.
Is your dad a fan of Lewis and Chesterton as well then?
Yes. Yeah. He introduced me to Lewis, and then I kind of introduced him to Chesterton. I said, "Hey, you gotta read this guy." And so he started to read it, and my dad's taking notes in the margins of his Chesterton books now. So you should see his copy of Orthodoxy. It's very cool.
That is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
You were saying about how every Lewis fan should go to the Wade Center. I think we're going to do another announcement. Marie and I just bought a house, and it's in Wisconsin,
Nice.
which is just a few hours drive from the Marigny Wade Center.
Yes.
So I'm just going to now call
nice.
that our summer home.
I like it. Yeah, it's a beautiful building. The Kilby Reading Room is where all the books are stored and where you sit. But yeah, the building itself is very beautiful.
Yeah. David's very excited. He's maybe more excited about that than the house. I'm like, oh, the kitchen. He's like, we can drive 3 hours to the Wade Center. I'm like, yeah.
That's awesome.
Woohoo.
Have you been to the Wade Center before?
No,
Neither of us.
No. Okay. Okay. But you've been to England and seen really cool stuff too.
I've been there once or twice.
Yeah.
We have gotten to see some really cool things there, but it would be great to see what they have in their collection here. So, okay. So David really wanted us to talk about the problem that your wife raised during your research. So
Yes.
can you tell
Yes,
everybody
yes.
about that a little bit?
Okay, so we found the notes in the margins, and really there were more notes in the kind of the blank back flaps of pages, particularly in Orthodoxy. Fancies versus Fads, I think, had some of that. Heretics a little bit, but particularly Orthodoxy. There's just tons of handwritten notes in the back of Orthodoxy. And so I said, hey, I think I can make a book out of this. I'm telling my wife, I'm like, I think, because I always kind of had in the back of my mind, maybe I'm going to write a book about this. But I just wanted to see this stuff, even if nothing came out of it. I just wanted to hold books that these guys owned. Like, that would have been cool too, just enough. But I was like, I think there can be a project here. So I started writing the book, and I'm talking to my wife about it. And she says, well, how do you know that these notes are even written by C.S. Lewis himself? You know, like, you buy used books and there's stuff already written in them. I thought, that's a really good question. Yeah. So I tried to ignore it a little bit. Truth be told, I had kind of wondered it once or twice myself, but I was also trying to suppress that. Like, no, this is just too cool. Like, we're just going to go. We're going to go. We're going to go. We're going to go. But see, I say in the book, and it's true, so I'll say it again here, I have to read like 10 good books to get to where my wife already was. My wife's the kind of person who, like, Chesterton would have, like, really loved. Like just common sense. Like, she grew up, like, the first 8 years of her life on, like, a Texas farm. She's just, like, a good-hearted, common sense person that I tell her all the time that she knows how to bottom line stuff. Like, she doesn't have to, like, take the long way. She just, like, gets it right away. And so for her to ask that question, I was like, I think I need to listen to her. I got to figure this out.
Oh, don't you hate that moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I have to be intellectually honest about this right now.
I was talking about listening to your wife, but that too.
Oh.
Yeah. So I managed to come upon the contact information for the now late Walter Hooper, who most C.S. Lewis fans love Walter Hooper because he kind of Lewis's literary executor towards the end of his life, and really helped to preserve Lewis's writings for future generations, saved some of his stuff from being burned, literally. Just a great guy.
Marie and I actually met him briefly when we were in Oxford.
Did you really?
Just after looking at all the
my
Chesterton
goodness.
stuff.
Oh my
We
gosh.
were wandering around in the church next door afterwards before Mass was going to start, and then I just stopped dead in my tracks, and Marie went, "What is it?" And I went, "I'm pretty sure that's Walter Hooper."
Oh my goodness. How long ago was that?
That was
2 years ago?
Yeah, 2 summers ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
She offered to tackle him for me. And it's not many people's wives would be willing to do that to an old man.
Well, I was
That's
like,
very
we've got to
nice of you.
secure the moment, But he was walking with a cane, so I think it was a good idea not to do
you knew
that.
he wasn't
You didn't have
going
to
anywhere
chase him.
quickly.
Yeah. So you got to chat with him for a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, I didn't get to meet him, but he and I did exchange an email. And so I kind of asked him, I said, hey, this is what we found at the Wade Center. Does this sound like something Lewis would have done? I was trying to just get anywhere close to some sort of authentication. And so he emails us back this very nice letter. It's in the book, but it didn't exactly quell our fears completely. He tells this story about this American student over in England who's looking at Lewis's notes in the margins of a book and was going to write some kind of a paper or something about it. And he must have seen her doing it. And he said, oh, I hate to burst your bubble kind of a thing, but that's not Lewis's handwriting. And which is, first of all, that's very sweet that he knew Lewis's handwriting that well, that he could just spot it right off like that. That's kind of adorable, honestly. But he emails this to me and I'm thinking, that doesn't sound
like
you're
not filling me with confidence here, so it's probably not him. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he also talked about how Lewis liked to take notes in books in pen and stuff, and I'm thinking I saw no pen, like almost no pen. It was pretty much all pencil stuff, and I'm thinking, great. Like these chapters have to just be scrapped. This is nothing. So then I stumbled upon a character who's in the book as well, Dr. Charlie Starr. And he is kind of this Lewis handwriting expert. Like, I didn't know such a person existed. But yeah, Charlie Starr has written articles and charts and graphs about Lewis's handwriting. I guess it changes over the years, or it changed over the years. And so he's got them in categories and eras and periods and times.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. So I got permission from the library for them to send photographs of the notations in question to Dr. Starr. He checked them out for us, and he finally emailed us back and said, yes, this is authentic Lewis stuff.
Yay!
So we were like, overjoyed. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Starr. Much appreciated. Yeah. Couldn't have done the book without him.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So each of the chapters of your book have fantastic names: Smith and Signal Boxes, Jokes as well as Justice. So I wanted just to talk about a few of the chapters and just to give the listeners a bit of a taste of what they can experience.
Cool.
So the first one that I want to talk about is Chapter 3, Goblins and Goodness. There you talk about the connection that both Lewis and Chesterton had to George MacDonald. Would you mind just unpacking that a little?
Yeah, George MacDonald was a Scottish writer who lived during the 1800s, and he was kind of a forerunner, I think, to a lot of the thought that would come later. And I'm particularly fond of him. My last name's Duncan. I have some Scottish blood on my dad's side, and so I'm always happy to see a Scottish writer being praised. But it's somebody that Chesterton was fond of, and somebody that Lewis was very influenced by MacDonald. He called him his master in many ways, and so it was just interesting to kind of, I didn't expect MacDonald to pop up as a character in this research, but he kind of kept coming up because Chesterton would talk about him, Lewis would talk about him, they'd cross-pollinate this information, and a lot of it centered around a particular quote that God is easy to please but hard to satisfy. Lewis and Chesterton both resonated with that quote.
Wow. Am I misremembering? Is it Fantastes that Lewis said his imagination was baptized by it?
He said the brightness of the book sort of came out into the rest of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, MacDonald's amazing. Although I am trying to finish Fantastes right now, and I don't like it as much as some of his other books, but I
heard you say that on the podcast. I heard you say that on
No.
Well, I
haven't read it yet. So I'm interested to jump into that myself.
I was reading it to Marie, and she kept falling asleep each time I did that. So she's now on her own.
There are certain books.
You tried.
There are certain books that we've been able to get through that way, but other books that just make me fall asleep. So Anyway.
Oh, I have a MacDonald book on my shelf. Here, let me show it to you real quick. Hang on. This was cool. I just found this at a used bookstore. It's The Light Princess by George MacDonald, but pictures by Maurice Sendak of Where the Wild Things Are, which I thought that's such a cool. I never would have.
What an interesting combo.
Those,
yeah.
Yeah. So I've started it, but I haven't really gotten to it. But it's these really like detailed rendered. Sorry, your listeners won't be able to see it, but you guys can.
That's beautiful.
These really detailed pictures. So I'm gonna read this to my kids for bedtime stories, I think.
Nice.
Well, if you read it to Marie, she will fall asleep.
Oh,
I promise.
She'll fall asleep. Would you have to stay up to look at the pictures though?
Yeah, yeah. Luckily, it's okay. He's not responsible for my bedtime stories. You are, so it's all on you. So in chapter 6 of your book, Appetite of Infancy, you mentioned Chesterton puppet shows, which are so fun and I've read about in various biographies. And when David and I were in England, we got to see some of his various articles, including puppets.
See and play with.
Yes, we did get to touch.
Stop. Seriously?
We got
My fingerprints are over everything.
We did get to touch everything. I think it was like this blessed week-long period before they were moving this whole collection of Chesterton's belongings, and they're not a museum, so they weren't like making us wear gloves or anything.
Or paying attention as we were sword fighting.
Yeah, we just...
Chesterton was smiling from above, I
know,
promise.
that's his style. He wouldn't want it to be so, I don't know, careful. But
think about it. When was the last time those puppets were played with? Like,
right?
It could have been him.
Right.
You could have been the next people.
The next children.
Well,
yes.
Knowing him, I feel like he and Francis, they gave away like everything when they passed. So I think probably they did get some use, but you're right. I mean, now he would have wanted them to be used. So
And apparently all of this stuff has been sent to a museum in London. I don't know, given COVID, if it actually opened. But I can assure you that unless they have cleaned his glasses, my thumbprint is on the right-hand lens.
Yeah.
Now, in that chapter, Appetite of Infancy, you also quote what is probably my favorite line from On 3 Ways of Writing for Children. It's the line, "When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up." And also in that chapter, you talk about someone that we recently mentioned on Barfield Month, Lewis's goddaughter, Lucy.
Yeah, well, to me, it's interesting that Lewis was kind of on record. Well, first of all, we know Lewis now as this guy who wrote one of the classic children's sagas of all time, which is another reason why you have to read Chesterton where you have to read Lewis, because Chesterton doesn't have something like the Chronicles of Narnia in his catalog. But we know him as this children's author. But he was on record saying, I really wasn't that fond of children until the war brought them to me. So London is undergoing this bombing siege during World War II. And, so kids were evacuated from London. They move into Lewis's home. And the first time, I guess, he really gets to be around kids, he actually finds that he does like them. And so I think that he might not have liked the idea of kids, but he always did. He always would have liked the kids. I think that's the first chance he got to be around them, he found that he liked them.
My suspicion is that Lewis was quite an odd child as a child, and other kids didn't understand him. And so I think he just assumed that would just continue through.
Yeah. And he was such a bachelor for so long, So as you said, he just wasn't exposed to them really.
Well, and his work was such, the kind of stuff that he did, the amount of writing and thinking that he had to do requires a lot of alone time. I've got two kids. I have a 6 and a 10-year-old, and, I like to write. It's very hard to write with a 6 and a 10-year-old. It is. So any writing that you two want to get done before this child comes out, you should write.
Yeah. Okay, babe, 3 months. Let's go. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so also in Chapter 8, The Binding Bet of Marriage, you talked about Chesterton's marriage to Frances and Lewis's marriage to Joy. So what were some of the things that you found that each of them said about marriage?
Yeah, well, Chesterton compared marriage to a bet. this binding bet, kind of this gamble.
Amen to that.
You're rolling the dice. Yeah.
Sometimes you win, sweetheart. Sometimes you win.
Yeah. But yeah, Chesterton saw all of life as this great adventure, and so of course he sees marriage as this exciting, this gamble, this bet. It's just you don't know what's going to happen, and so he's just got this excitement about entering into marriage. But in the book, I talk about the joy of the beginning of Chesterton's marriage, because he was just so excited when he got engaged. He writes like a letter and a poem to her practically when they get engaged.
Way to make us all look bad.
Yeah, I know, seriously. And then so Lewis, I kind of talk about the end of his marriage, sadly. But so in A Grief Observed, Lewis compares marriage to a dance, and that even after a spouse leaves you through death, you don't have to really stop dancing with them. It's kind of the final figure is the death, and then you kind of can still get to learn to love that person even when they're away. And I just thought it was just a beautiful way to think about it. And it seemed to be one of the only things that gave him peace during that time. Because A Grief Observed is a tough read. I read it on summer vacation with my family at the beach, and I was like in agony. I'm like, why am I reading this? This is brutal.
Not a beach
I love
read.
This guy. Yeah, it was not a beach read. Although it did kind of say, enjoy these moments that you have with your wife and kids. Just enjoy them. In that sense, it was a very helpful read.
Yeah.
I first read A Grief Observed one Saturday morning, I want to say about 5 months into marriage. Marie was asleep. I went out, got my copy, cup of tea, climbed back into bed, and read it from cover to cover. So I think I'm equally weird.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I didn't do it in one sitting. That's pretty amazing.
I wake up and you're crying next to me.
Yeah. I love you. Yeah, you're like, please don't die. Yeah.
I love both of them on marriage because they both very clearly believed and lived in their marriages that it's such a precious gift to be married, and the love that each of them had for their wives is just so beautiful. And I don't know, we frequently talk to people about marriage as some of our friends are heading that way and some of our friends who are newly married like us as well. But
shout out to Joe, who just got engaged last night.
Yes, congratulations, Joe and Kylie. But
congrats.
So like the world tells us today that if you're not happy one day, do what makes you happy, even at the expense of your spouse, at the expense of the family around you. But they just saw marriage as such a gift and something that is more important than day-to-day happiness. And like Lewis's grief when Joy died, he still saw the beauty and like appreciated his marriage to her so much, even though he suffered so much because of it.
Yeah, it was like he didn't have to stop loving her. I think that he realized he didn't have to stop loving her. And I don't know. It's just, yeah, you're right. It's a beautiful picture.
So moving on, my favorite chapters were definitely the ones towards the end. Chapter 9, which was Modern Day Madmen, where you examine how they both push back on chronological snobbery. And Chapter 10, Jokes as Well as Justice, where you talk about Chesterton's humor when debating and Lewis's letters to children, which are adorable. Mm-hmm. And you also had an interesting hypothesis about the interaction between orthodoxy and the Screwtape letters. So would you mind talking about some of those things, Chapter 9, Chapter 10, and your Screwtape hypothesis?
Sure. Let's talk about that last one first. Let's jump right to the Screwtape hypothesis. I've got it right here. I've got my copy of Screwtape right here. In the preface of Screwtape, Lewis says this. Let me read it here. Because Lewis was trying to figure out how he wanted to depict the demonic characters in Screwtape. He was trying to, how do I write them? And he quotes Chesterton. He says, Satan, said Chesterton, fell through force of gravity. He said, we must picture hell as a state where everyone is perpetually concerned about his own dignity and advancement, where everyone has a grievance, and where everyone lives the deadly serious passions of envy, self-importance, and resentment. And so he's talking about, I'm not going to make my demonic characters funny and frivolous. I'm going to make them dark and serious and evil. Because he saw other writers making the demonic kind of funny or light in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, no, we're going to make it evil. And I think that his reading of Chesterton, as he quotes him here in Screwtape itself in the 1961 preface, to me, I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe he kind of learned that from Chesterton, at least in some way. He was reminded, you know what? I'm going to make these guys dark and evil because that's what evil is. It's not funny. Evil can't be funny. I mean, maybe we can laugh about something that's bad that happens to us, but evil itself is self-serious and not humorous.
You have to have a little bit of humility in order to be funny.
Yeah, precisely. Angels can fly because they can take themselves lightly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, which other ones? What do you want to talk about? Which other ones?
Chapter 9, Modern Day Madmen, where they both push back on chronological snobbery, and Jokes as Well as Justice, Chesterton's humor when debating, and Lewis's letters to children.
Oh, nice. Yeah, let's talk about Lewis's letters to children for a little bit. One of my favorite things about reading those letters is kind of how often he kind of has to answer the same question about Narnia, and he's not too good for it. He just answers it again. Someone else writes him, it's the same question, but he answers it again. And that's just in the volume that I have. He does it a couple of times. It's kind of the same question. He'll answer it again. The editors of that book, which is, I don't know if it was Walter Hooper or not, but the editors of that book probably left out so many other times that he answered the same question.
Yeah.
And so I just found that is kind of the one of the great signs of humility in Lewis. This is this great author and writer and lecturer, and he's just answering these sweet questions from children time and time and time and time again. And I loved that.
Yeah.
I'm not such a good man. One of the reasons I first started a blog was just simply so I could write something once, and then when anyone asked me the question again, I could just say, "Go look at my blog. It's up there," and then I could walk away.
Well, you responded to my email, and so I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, it may take us months, but we do respond in the end. Well, David responds much more quickly than I do. You're good about that.
Well, and this kind of gets us to the modern, we talk about modern day madmen as one of the chapters. It would have been interesting to see these guys living in this modern day society and what they would have said about certain technologies. I think we can extrapolate from their writings and try to layer them on to some of the things that we're going through in our modern day. And I think they've got a lot to say about it. And that's one of the things that I like about their writing. It's very timeless. You've got to do a little work to transfer it 100 years, in Chesterton's case, many times, transfer it 100 years. Lewis, not quite that far, but still pretty far. And see, what would they say about, social media? What would they say about smartphones? What would they say about our use of this and what it's doing to our minds?
Yeah.
I think they'd have a lot of warnings for us.
And what about Chesterton's humor when debating? I also like that part in particular.
Oh, well, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. One of my favorite kind of anecdotes comes about the time when Chesterton debates Clarence Darrow. When I was a kid in school, we had to read about the Scopes monkey trial. It was this big debate in 1925. We're actually talking about this on my radio broadcast, The Public Square, the next couple of weeks. This big trial, creation versus evolution. Evolution was being banned in Tennessee schools. And so Clarence Darrow comes in to defend this poor teacher who's getting criticized for teaching evolution. And it's this big show trial. It's called the Trial of the Century in America. And they made a stage play, Inherit the Wind, out of it. And then they made the film, Inherit the Wind, out of it as well, starring Spencer Tracy and a bunch of other famous people. And basically the Clarence Darrow character, I think they changed his name, but the Clarence Darrow lawyer character basically eviscerates fundamentalist religion and stakes this win for science and progress in the face of these stupid religious folks. Chesterton heard about that. All the way across the pond, Chesterton hears about this. And when Chesterton came over for the second time to America, they said, "Hey, you want to debate Darrow in New York City before a crowd of 4,000 people?" Chesterton says, yeah, why not? So it's dubbed the Clash of the Titans. And sadly, we don't have a transcript of the full debate, but the newspaper accounts of it afterwards say that Chesterton just mopped the floor with Darrow. But it's just cool because people talk about how Chesterton he was just smarter, funnier, kinder, nicer. The power went out during the debate at one point, and Chesterton jumps up and says, see, science is not infallible, and the crowd loved it. And so he just always had that wit and that whimsy and that levity to him. And I think that we can learn a lot in our modern day, kind of in our current politics. It's very polarized, and people want to fight. And Chesterton was not somebody to back down from a debate, but he did it in a way that Clarence Darrow at the end of his life said, I love that guy, basically. He was a great guy.
Yeah, he made all of his quote unquote enemies or, the opposition love him.
Yeah, he did. We need to learn from that, I think.
Yeah.
And humor and levity goes a long way with it, I think.
Yeah.
So what was your main takeaway from doing all of this research and putting together the audiobook?
My main takeaway is very simple. I love both of these guys. I love Gilbert. I love Jack. I love G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis. And I want people to familiarize themselves with these writers if they haven't already. Another thing that I think about is how books have affected us. I mean, we're sitting here talking about authors today. If you feel like God's given you a book to write it, because somebody might be talking about it 50 years from now, 100 years from now. It might impact them. I'm very grateful for these men who have followed what God had for them and wrote these works that have helped me so greatly in my spiritual development. So, I'm just very, very grateful. I think that's what I take from it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on this crossover episode with Pints with Jack and Pints with Chesterton. Where can people go to find out more about you and your audiobook?
Oh, well, again, thanks for asking. And thank you guys for having me. This has been so fun. Like I said, I listen to both your guys' stuff. The Eagle and Child videos I love. I think that's some of the best stuff. If you've got like a skeptic friend or somebody who's wondering about the faith, you could send them to those Eagle and Child videos. And I'm reading Man Alive along with you ladies. And so I really appreciate what you do.
Slowly but surely.
So I know I need to catch up. I'm a couple behind.
We're behind. It's not you. Pregnancy, man. We'll blame it on the baby.
Fair enough. But yeah, I guess, so thank you guys for what you're doing, and thanks for having me. If somebody wants to find out about the book, again, the Public Square app is a great place too. You could just search Alan C. Duncan. AlanCDuncan.net is my website. Follow me on Twitter at Alan C. Duncan. Just look for Gilbert and Jack any place that you get your books, and hopefully it'll be there.
Alan, thanks so much for coming on the show. And we'd also like to thank all of our Patreon supporters, especially our top-tier supporters, Gary, Kevin, Brian, Kay, Monique, Paul, Kimberly, Gillis, Jake, Stephen, Matt, Jeff, Chris, John, James, Kate, and Rowdy. Anne-Marie, my little marshmallow, my little croissant.
Oh my gosh.
Where can people go to find Pints with Chesterton, and what sort of thing do you talk about on your delightful podcast?
You can go to pintswithchesterton.com, and we have so far talked about Father Brown, some poetry, and we are going to try to finish Man Alive before this baby comes. And then we'll be diving into orthodoxy. So please join us there. David, where can people find Pints with Jack?
Thank you, my bright star. We are...
I swear he doesn't do this normally.
You can find out about Pints with Jack at pintswithjack.com. And we go through the works of C.S. Lewis chapter by chapter. And so far, we've done Mere Christianity, The Great Divorce, Till We Have Faces, and the Screwtape Letters. And about the time this is coming out, we should be in the middle of Screwtape Proposes a Toast. And listeners, please join us all next time,
when we'll be going further up
and further in.
Cheers.
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 Woo! Yay! Oh my gosh, it's so hot.